Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm your host. The podcast where we talk about all things HR tech, world of work, leadership, AI, a bunch of other stuff. So we try to drop new episodes every Thursday, but we try. We don't always do that, but usually every Thursday morning, early in the morning. And so this is a really good topic. So this one here is called From Stage to Strategy: How a Background in Performing Arts enhances HR leadership. So from stage, performing arts. So a really interesting topic. And I always say that, but this one is actually really interesting, not to minimize my laugh again. And we have a fantastic guest here, today. So Kate Ryan of OnePass. Once again, this podcast lives on our website, GoScaleHR.com, which is going through a massive blow up. We'll have a new one hopefully by this month, maybe next month. And also these episodes can be accessed on our YouTube channel as well. So we have a growing audience. So if you want to hit like, subscribe, obviously, so then you get notified of new videos drop, but also share your thoughts and comments as well. So, let's get right into our topic here. And so there's a couple points that I want to make first. And so the first point the episode really explores an unexpected yet deeply powerful connection. How the world of performing arts, so something that I'm not very good at. I did drama in high school. I didn't do well, but so then I realized that I'm probably best not to be an actor. But anyway, the world of performing arts, how it can actually equip HR leaders with skills that go far beyond the script, from commanding presence to improvising in moments of change. The stage and the boardroom have more in common than I think, actually, which is really interesting. And I think the second point is when it comes to, in a time when empathy, agility, and storytelling are at the heart of people leadership, we're turning to someone who has lived in both worlds. So performance and HR, to uncover how theatrical training can elevate everything from employee engagement to a leadership presence. So, it's really interesting. So when you talk about that or think about that concept, the idea is not to, act or fake your way through it, in that sense, but it's some of the skills, that are learned. And so Kate Ryan of OnePass help us, break it all down. So welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm happy to be here. If you had told actor me many years ago that I would be talking about this and the corporate world on a podcast one day, I wouldn't have believed it, but I'm excited.
Well, have you ever seen that graphic where, how careers go nowadays? So like 30, 40 years ago, careers used to go like this, right? You start
Totally.
somewhere and then work your way up, right? Now it's like this weird path that goes like this and up and down and all around. Well, that's been my career. And I think
Totally.
maybe yours also. You probably set out to be, I don't know, maybe you were,
I
wanted
did.
to go to Hollywood.
Yeah, you're right. I set out to be a professional actor. I got my acting degree and then I got my job as a waitress and I got an agent and I did the whole thing. And it was not for me, is all I can say from a lifestyle perspective. But as Steve Jobs once said, you can only connect the dots in reverse. So I never knew kind of where each little path was taking me, but it's kind of wild to be here now. But I'm very happy with the way things have landed for me. And I'm very intrigued to kind of put these dots together for other people. Because as you said, I think there's more in common between the stage and the boardroom than people think.
Do you ever wish, like sometimes, like say you're having dinner or you're thinking about something, like is there a small part of you that wishes that you were made it to like mainstream,
Yeah, yes, definitely. I think that for anyone who has like a passion and a talent and something that they fostered for many years growing up. And for me, I grew up on stage is kind of like what I like to tell people. And it was really the only thing I was told I was good at for many, many years of my life. And I think there are many moments when I, especially now having made so many kind of friends as an adult and corporate colleagues and connections, sometimes I want to be like, no, guys, like I used to do this thing and I was actually really good. Like this was like a huge part of my identity for a very long time. And people just don't know that about me anymore. So yeah, there are moments when I wish I could do a little bit more of both to say, I'm great at this one thing and I built this career, but like once upon a time, there was a really big piece of me that lived to perform and it was all I ever did.
So now you're not an actor anymore, but you still wish that you were, but you do have a regular job and you work, for fantastic organizations. And so maybe tell us a bit about your roles, what you do.
Yeah, so I work for 1Password, which is an incredible Canadian tech company. I lead their employer brand, HR communications, and diversity and inclusion team. What I like to say is that my world and my team's world is making the people behind the product feel seen and celebrated and supported. Kind of pillars, as I call them, have historically, I think, been islands at companies. You might have a diversity team, you might have a comms team, you might have an employer brand team, but it's been a real, challenge and pleasure and joy to bring together these practitioners and create kind of this larger island and home for functions that may feel a little isolated within a company. So a lot of my role has to do with storytelling, kind of strategy building around culture. I'm really lucky to get to partner with subject matter experts, not only across our kind of large HR team, but across the company in marketing and communications. And, it's very, very cool to bring this together. And as I said, you can only connect the dots in reverse. I never thought that all of these things would kind of come together and I'd get to play a hand in them, but it's really fun.
This is actually not that common to merge those three things that
Totally.
you actually do together in one, which is really interesting. Obviously, I think that's a really sort of fun role. Actually, you got
Yeah.
three different things that actually connect. But so just talking about your background in
Yeah.
theater. So, how did your background in theater influence your early approach, to HR?
Yeah.
And when did you first realize that those skills were actually an asset to the
Yeah.
workplace?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting for me to identify with HR. When I started in the kind of tech world over 10 years ago now, I started in sales and I built my early career in sales and marketing. And, as I kind of evolved in my marketing role, I got into employer brand, which is very much this kind of island between a marketing and communications team and a people team. So my evolution in HR has been very unexpected. And, I think I've almost at times had a hard time adopting the identity because I didn't go to school for the kind of, what we would historically consider procedural or legal learnings around HR. But I think with how it's evolved, so much of HR now has to do with just people and putting people first. And that's actually one of our core values at 1Password is like, how do we put people at the center of what we're doing? And I think my background and kind of this training and this way I came up in the world of performing and, going to get an acting degree and learning a lot about how to read a room has served me
Yeah.
really well. And I think that I learned kind of as I was coming up in leadership more so than HR that I had a knack for kind of like either bringing people together into a conversation and socializing work or just being very present with people. I think one of the things you're doing when you're on stage with a scene partner is you're listening. You're listening to understand. You're not listening to respond with your next line because it's very obvious to an audience that that's inauthentic, you're out of the scene. So I think I learned that I kind of had this skill to either bring people together or just to be with people and kind of understand the nuance of what they were saying and really listen and get present with them. And I started to see that that was a skill. I think kind of coming into the corporate world, not having gone to business school, I wasn't quite sure what a soft skill was and what it wasn't. But as I looked around, as I was kind of coming up in my career, I was like, oh, not everyone can do this.
Yeah.
And I started to hone in on that.
I mean, I can tell you this. I mean, I went to school for business and I majored in HR. I don't think I learned a whole lot,
Mm,
to be honest with you, which is why I'm a huge believer in on the job experience
yeah,
and learning. So,
totally.
just because you didn't go to school for HR,
Yeah.
don't worry about it. Trust
Thank
me.
you. I'll let go of my imposter syndrome now.
Yeah, exactly. You shouldn't have that, but anyway. Yeah. So these next questions I had to do a bit of research because I'm not an actor. I had to learn a little bit about it. But this
Yeah.
next question is, so what performance techniques, so talking about acting and so on, like presence, voice,
Yeah.
improv, which I've done before, which was a lot of fun, have you found most transferable to leadership or coaching situations in HR?
Yeah, I think presence, to call one out that you mentioned explicitly is a big one. I think so much of what we do, especially in now what is a very, remote first, digital first world, it's so easy to be distracted all day, whether that's multitasking on a Zoom meeting, whether that's, doing 50 things within your day when you could have just, done one really well. I think that I've learned about myself. I'm not, so I try very hard when I'm doing something to be present in it. And I think that's, the number one thing that you learn when you're in acting school is you have to be present with your scene partner and on stage. So I think presence is a big one. I also think improv skills are so underrated in the corporate world. I literally would tell everyone to go and do an improv class, not because you need to perform, not because you need to become an actor, but thinking on your feet. I think the more senior I've gotten in my career, the more I've realized that that is a skill, and it's not, relying on notes, relying on speaker notes, relying on things, that you've written down and you just hope it goes exactly as you want it to. It so rarely does. And I think that, again, as I kind of read the room and understood the corporate world when I was coming up, I was like, oh, some people are not that quick on their feet and they're not quick at pivoting. And I think especially as you get into presenting to senior audiences and, time is limited and you got to make your point really quickly. That's all improv, it's all the ability to just pivot and say, okay, no, we're going to focus on this. That's okay. We'll make a note for the other thing. And I think like there are improv techniques, things like yes and, which are, don't block your partner, just like keep going with what you're being given. And, I think that all of these things are just, they're so relevant in presentation skills at work. You could get as basic as just like, going to Toastmasters and learning how to, give a good presentation and being confident in that. But I think improv more is that ability to pivot. And I think, especially with just like how fast paced our working world is now, that's a skill that I value in myself. And I try to hone too. It's not always natural to me, but I think that improv, and really understanding, okay, my audience is not with me right now. We've got to course correct is such a skill when it comes to corporate presenting and persuading, persuading your audience as well.
So I could not agree more with you, about the improv stuff. So I'll tell you just a quick story. So growing up in Vancouver, I went to business school in Vancouver, and I actually created my own co-op program with the Vancouver Canucks, right?
Wow,
So I'm a
so
hockey
cool.
fan. And so I had the opportunity to meet face-to-face with Brian Burke, who,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
those of you who know who Brian Burke is, was the former general manager of the Vancouver Canucks. He's been the GM for, many other teams. He's a former lawyer, kind of brash, rough around the edges, but super smart guy. Right. And so I remember I was, like I was 19 years old and I was just going to third year, and I had a meeting with him,
Wow.
and I asked him a question. I said, what advice, would you give me as a young, professional starting out? He said, quote, ready?
Ready.
Know your shit and be confident that you belong in the room.
Yeah.
And then he also said
So true.
that with that in mind, you need to be confident to speak up. And that
Yes.
means knowing your audience, knowing what your topics are, not knowing everything, but don't be afraid to add to the conversation. So that really resonated with me.
Absolutely.
And I knew that I had to get really good at the presentation stuff. And I didn't call it like improv, but
Call it
thinking on your feet, reading the room, knowing this shit, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, not being afraid to speak up. So I
And
think those are
you're
awesome.
absolutely right. And I think that you can, as you say, you can name this whatever you want. And I think that oftentimes when we start to use the naming conventions that exist in the arts, improv is comedy. It's just for fun. It's just this. But no, improv is being able to be agile, to think on your feet, to pivot, to use, to come up with a persuasive argument, to bring your audience along with you. This is stuff we're doing all day, every day, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're working for a company, you're a performer. And I think no matter what you call it, it's so important.
100%.
So important.
So just shifting gears here just a little bit. So obviously a big part of your background is storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And so we hear that a lot in HR, leadership and so on, but I don't know if people actually know what that means. So how can HR leaders use storytelling, which is obviously something that is very central to theater, to build trust, drive culture, or to influence change across an organization? So how can HR leaders use storytelling?
Yeah, I think that storytelling, again, it makes the abstract feel very human and real. And I think, so much of what we do, especially in these technology companies now, is data driven. What are we doing? How are we responding to data? What does the data tell us? But the data tells us the thing. How do we then tell the story around that? And I think whether that data is quantitative, hard data that we're talking about, people metrics, I'm really lucky to work with a people analytics manager, and she and I have a lot of conversations about how we're putting a story together. She helps me a lot when it comes to kind of working with hard quantitative data. But, I also do a lot of storytelling with qualitative data. And what are our employees telling us? Like, what are we hearing? Sentiment analysis. What are we talking about? How are we making changes? How are we bringing the company along for what may be a very intangible part of our cultural journey? Something we've been talking a lot about at One Password this year is, a focus on high performance. We're hearing a lot of this in the market as well. So how are you bringing employees along for this journey? It can be a very intangible concept, but I think storytelling, especially when it comes to cultural work, is just making the implicit explicit. It's creating a human element to something that otherwise could just feel like corporate jargon. And it's honestly one of my favorite parts of my role, not because it's easy or fun all the time, but how you message something is, ultimately sometimes make or break. Do people understand? Are they bought in? To go back to the point about persuasion, are we persuading people to understand this and come along with us? And I think that in HR in particular, HR has become such a large function encompassing everything from traditional HR to now people like me, roles that have a lot more to do with philosophy or communications and strategy. And we all have this role to play in speaking to the rest of the company. How are we telling that story, and how can we use this to build trust and to bring people along? And I think to get tactical, I think so much of it has to do with repeating the message. I think we have to do things again and again and again. You have to come up with the right communications cascade from top to middle to bottom, whatever it is. But I think it's a huge part of HR now. And it's no longer, gone are the days of sending a memo and hoping people read it. It's now, how are we creating communications campaigns?
Yeah, I always found storytelling to be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Like not me personally, but just from a sort of a like HR community standpoint,
Yeah.
it's not a natural strength, and which is why I always, whenever I led HR for tech companies, I always made sure that one of the key people that I got to know right away was the CMO.
Yeah.
So chief marketing officer, because I really wanted, because they were doing a great job with the product and the service brand and then the company, but they had nothing to do with the employer brand, which is very similar. Obviously, you're just selling to a different audience. But so I found that the whole storytelling aspect of why it's great to work at your organization and all these type of things
Totally.
really difficult. But I think that is something that that HR has to do.
Yeah, yeah, and I think HR can foster. I think that typically, as you said, I mean, we rely on a marketing team, and like I partner very closely with our marketing team. I love our
Yeah.
corporate internal communications lead. We do a lot together, but I think for how much HR is expected to do now, let's foster the skill of being able to tell internal stories as well. Let's help people understand that if you're an HR practitioner, you can do this too. You can do it in
Yeah.
partnership, but we can help you, come up with narratives around things. And I think we're very lucky at One Password to be well resourced in that. But even in smaller companies, like who is the person who's a good writer? Like, how can you kind of leverage that so that you don't feel you're just sending information out to the company and hoping it lands, which is, we see that a lot. And that's historically been the way HR function.
Absolutely. So, so, so what would you say to someone who, if it's an HR leader or if it's an HR practitioner that wanted to incorporate art-based techniques into their own development or team training? So where should they start? Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah. I mean, going,
Besides call Kate Ryan, 1-800 call Kate, which
yeah.
actually work. No, no, it
Yeah,
doesn't.
going back to what I said, I mean, I think improv is like such an underrated skill. I think it's intimidating to people because people think it means getting up on stage and flopping and trying to make people laugh. But I think that, if you have a team of people that you're working with, what are some, little improv games that you can do? One of them called Yes and, you tell a story together and you can't shut down anyone's idea. You just have to keep saying yes and then you add to the story. It's funny, it's team building, it's easy, it's low stakes. I also think writing and writing prompts. Again, we don't all have to be novelists. We don't have to write memoirs, but how do we get this is such a core skill of the corporate world is communication. How do we get people a little bit more comfortable with writing things down? Maybe it's a prompt, every Monday or, every team meeting once a month there's a prompt that people have to write something about. They don't even have to share it, they just have to do it. But I think that we often view creativity as this side of your desk thing, and I would have to do that. I think it's actually just something we can incorporate into our day to day. Start small. You don't have to be an artist, but I think getting a little bit more comfortable with thinking on your feet, or with, communicating a concept that you're responsible for in an HR team, it will serve you so well. And I think that it's not that hard to do. And we can take the terror out of, we're all going to go get up on stage and the funniest person is going to win. We don't have to do it that way,
You could, but no.
We could.
Yeah,
Especially
like I
like,
know.
especially in a remote environment. I think this is really low stakes. Do it on a virtual team meeting. And I think
No,
help people understand that this is to build your work skills, not because me as a leader thinks this is fun and I have a background in acting.
right. No, I mean, I totally agree with that. I mean, I was just laughing about the whole stage thing because I know people, might be great in small groups with
Mm-hmm.
their colleagues, their peers, friends, family, but then for some reason, when they get on a stage, like an actual stage, it's like they just freeze in fear. And
Totally.
I was one of those people. Like I had a really difficult time with it many years ago, with even a video camera, being on video like
Yeah.
this was really, really daunting for me.
Yeah.
But I knew that, personally had to overcome it somehow, because I knew that it was a skill that was going to be sought after. And, sure enough, with lots of hard work, I'm very comfortable now on
I was
stage. I've
gonna
been on
say
stage
you'd
many times
never
in my
know.
career.
You'd never
Yeah.
know that you were ever uncomfortable on stage.
Oh yeah. Like every time I do an event or whatever, I get nervous, but then that nervousness stops. It goes away after about 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. So what is one thing that our viewers can take away from anything that we've talked about today?
I think exactly what I just said. I think that creativity does not need to be separate from your day-to-day job. We are all doing things creatively, whether we want to identify with that or not. I think especially as leaders, we are always having to think through things creatively, whether that's delivering feedback, whether that's coming up with some sort of strategic approach, whether that's coming up with a new idea or project. These things just do not have to be viewed as separate from your day to day. This doesn't have to be side of your desk work. It can be things that we incorporate. I think creativity is such a human thing. And the more that we can find those little avenues in our day to day, especially as HR practitioners who are responsible for people, and the human experience at a company, I think the better served that those companies will be. So yeah, creativity is in everybody, and it's a part of you. You can make it a part of your work.
I believe that every single person has the ability to, be creative. There's
Yes.
different elements to that, of course, right? And I think a lot of people don't have a lot of self-confidence, so they feel that, they come up with something that might be different, then there's going to be sort of negative pushback. But you know what? I used to always push my team, always. Like, every single one of you have some element of
Yes.
creativity, and if you want to do something different and try something out, go for it, because right. But it's not easy. I mean, some people will go for it, and then some won't. So obviously, trying to create the condition as
Yes.
a leader to make it safe and okay for them to give.
Absolutely. It has to be modeled. Like, I think especially that's the responsibility of leaders. How are you modeling this? How are you talking about how maybe it made you super uncomfortable? Or I just think that we set the stage, for lack of a better term, no pun intended.
Pun intended.
But intended. But I think that, it helps us so much for anyone who's leading people, and then for HR practitioners who are really responsible for people at a company.
I used to coach this one HR leader, and the HR leader didn't understand why her team weren't taking chances, like taking risks, right?
Yeah.
And so as we got into the work, we realized, or this leader realized, that she was very risk averse.
Yeah.
That was the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is that when someone came up with a new idea, there was always a lot of pushback. And I said, well, those are the problems right there. I mean, if you're not modeling the behavior that you're asking your team to do, there's always going to be this disconnect. And she didn't realize that. And then she, so once she uncovered that actualization, then she was able to move forward and say, okay, so I need to change that. And then as soon as she changed her behavior, voila, her team did too. Magic, right? So
I love that.
All right, Kate. So I just want to thank you, very much for being here. This is the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. We try to drop new episodes every Thursday. Episodes live on our website, GoScaleHR.com. We want Chash to hear from you. So please drop a comment. Don't be afraid to drop comment. Just be nice. But I mean, if you want to, constructive criticism is always good. I love that. Just be nice. Okay. And, but Kate, thanks for being here, and we're going to talk soon.